Hi there.
How's it going?
It's going well. Welcome to the University of Louisville.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. So I have two sections, combined sections of my sport law class. These are all undergraduate level students, and then I've got a couple of faculty who are very much interested in sitting in and hearing about some of your experiences involving legal issues in sport, issues involving activism, and sort of the things that you've encountered while in the league and then post-league. I sent them a copy of the Littler-Mendelson report that they had, that the independent sort of investigators had created. I also sent them some links from your dead spinning and also your, the hilarious and excellent letter to the congressman involving his comments involving people keeping their mouths shut about marriage equality and things of that nature. So I think we've got a pretty good base in understanding some of the things that you've been involved with and some of the issues that you've encountered. And we also, prior to speaking with you, we covered a couple of chapters in the sports law book looking at employment law issues involving this hiring, firing on the basis of interestable classifications, and then as well as sexual harassment within sport. And we talked a little bit about the Jonathan Martin, Richie Incognito stuff, and we talked about some of your situations. So I think the students are pretty well versed to have a good base to have some discussions about some real world issues involving the law and sport. And again, very excited to have you. And I, take as much time as you want. Don't feel obligated to speak, for, until you're blue in the face. When you want to be done, that's perfectly fine. But I know that some students have questions. But I was hoping we could just start with maybe a little bit of your background. I guess we can either talk about kind of your path to professional sports as well as kind of how you, what was the basis for you deciding to take a stand and become sort of an activist in the sense of not many people within athletics, especially while they're playing, choose to take a stand and talk about issues of importance involving law and equity. So we'd love just to hear a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, so I originally started playing football in high school. I played baseball and soccer growing up. Never had any plans to play football, but I needed a fall sport in high school. I didn't want to do cross country because I hate running. So I figured I could kick a soccer ball pretty far. So let's see if I can kick a football pretty far. And it worked out okay for me. It's no complaints there. But as far as the activism stuff, that was something where a group had asked me on Twitter. They got in contact with me. They said, "Hey, there's this amendment coming through in Minnesota. Would you help us out with this?" And I looked at it and I was like, "Yeah, this seems like something that would be a worthy cause to try to raise some awareness of, because discrimination in the state constitution, generally not a good idea for any sort of stable polity like that. That's pretty bad."
Yes.
So I said yes, and I'd love to help out, and then things just kind of went from there.
So go for
basically,
it.
whenever I do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. So you're getting everything from me.
So be careful what you ask for, because you'll get it 100% to the max, right?
Oh yes, exactly.
So you went to UCLA, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Did you, UCLA, a school, famous for, at least, it's not for activism. Did you, any of these sort of thoughts about, equality or anything like that? Or did you ever encounter any type of issues or worthy causes while in college, or did it start when you were playing for the Vikings?
Well, it's funny because when I was in college, I was actually kind of turned off the idea of social activism because of how students went about it at UCLA. And the thing is, you would see there. So there's the federal building right off of Wilshire there, where students like to protest, and you'd go up there and ask them, "Hey, what are you protesting?" And they'd say, "I don't know, I'm just here because other people are here." It's like, well, what's the point?
Yes.
If you can't defend your position, if you don't know what you're even there for, why are you doing this? And so I was just kind of like, well, this just seems like people are doing it because it's the college thing to do. I'm a protester because I'm in college. And it's like, well, no, if you're going to protest something, protest it because you're legitimately upset about it or you have a reason to protest it. Don't just do it because other people are doing it. And so that kind of, I was just like, whatever. I mean, obviously in my own mind, I'm like, yes, let's treat people equally, let's treat people fairly. That seems like a really good way to live my life, but I wasn't going to go out and say it because I didn't really see any causes to say it, and part of that probably was me not looking for causes. I'm sure there were plenty going on that I could have helped, but at the time I was, I would also say I probably wasn't quite as socially aware as I am now, and so it was more focusing on football and staying eligible while playing video games all day, which was that was tricky.
Yes.
But no, and then once I got into the NFL, I started becoming more and more aware, and a lot of that too actually had to do with social media. Is that the people I followed on social media, the people I talked to on social media, the people who brought things to my attention on social media, they would point out this stuff, and that's one of the great things about social media is that if you don't turn it into an echo chamber, you can see a lot more views than you would normally be exposed to in kind of your limited circle of friends and acquaintances. And the key goal is to make sure you don't turn it into an echo chamber. So that to me was one of the main things. Is I think after social media, I really became a lot more aware. Whereas before I kind of had like a vague understanding. Now it was very much okay. Here are concrete examples. Here are things that are happening, and I can actually do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an interesting point you make about social media. When you say an echo chamber, you mean don't basically insulate yourself with like-minded people who share your views, or
Yeah, exactly. And I actually wrote a piece about that in my book about how the example I used, and it was pretty funny at the time, was this was when the Pope first got a Twitter account, the old Pope, not the new Pope, Emperor Palpatine, not the new one. And so the Pope's Twitter account was him following himself in 7 different languages. And like, if that just doesn't completely miss the point, I don't know what does. Because like that's the very definition of an echo chamber. All you're hearing is your own view coming back to yourself over and over and over again. And you see that a lot with people where you can get a very good sense of where someone's political allegiances lie, where kind of their general political thoughts lie, simply by going through who they follow.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look at the list of who people follow, then it will give you a very good outline of who they are. And so that's something where social media turns into an echo chamber, because if all you do is follow like-minded individuals, well then that's all you're going to hear.
So that's a great point. Let's translate that to sport. Is sport at its highest levels within management, within coaching, within the workplace that is professional sport, is that an echo chamber? Are they just surrounding themselves with like-minded people so that it's difficult, if there is some sort of matter of expression, or if there's an issue involving employment matters, does it make it that much more difficult to have real-world sort of logic apply into the professional sport context? If you, I guess I'm not asking a very good question, but do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. And the most recent example and the most glaring example is the whole Ray Rice case. I mean, this is a case where the NFL obviously does not know how to deal with domestic violence, has not known how to deal with domestic violence for a long time, but felt that they could just keep doing the same thing over and over because, hey, it's us. I guess what we're doing is working. We don't need to look for any outside voices. Sure, some players may hit their wives from time to time, but it's never really gotten that much attention. So let's keep the status quo, and that's something that the NFL is now figuring out. That oh crap, this is something we need to deal with. We do need outside voices here. We can't be this monolithic entity because we're going to start hemorrhaging customers, and you're really starting to see that now. I don't know if they'll go far enough because the NFL is a very monolithic organization in that it changes very, very slowly. But I think if enough people maintain their awareness of the NFL and kind of its obligations to people, that there will be change. And actually, one point I do want to bring up is, because I get this a lot from people, is like, why, they ask me, why should we care about what the NFL does? Why should the NFL be this moral arbiter of society?
Yikes.
And I always tell them, this is a $1 billion industry that you are giving public funds to for stadiums. Your tax dollars are going into this business. You absolutely have a public interest in the NFL and its moral imperatives. I mean, these are role models for children that are on your television, over a third of the year when the season is on, and even when the season's not on, you've got things like the draft, you've got things like the combine, and I mean, this is what children are looking up to, our players, our executives, the NFL is the most widely watched sport in America for a reason. People can't get enough of it, and so therefore it has the obligation as a role model to behave as a proper role model.
Absolutely, and you bring up another good point. And when you talk about social responsibility or responsibilities to be a role model, one of many bells that goes off in my head is concussions. You were playing in a time when concussions became such a hot button issue, and I'm curious, were concussions or anything like that talked about in the locker room, or was it another thing that was swept under the rug or trivialized when you were playing?
It was something where players didn't have information. I know a lot of guys I played with who had concussions, and they were trying to get back into the game as quick as they can, because the other thing about the NFL is that if you're not on the field, they're actively looking to replace you. And even if you're on the field, they're actively looking to replace you. So you can't let anything keep you off the field. And you hear coaches say it all the time, you can't make the team in the ice tub. And so that for legit injuries, they're like, yeah, you're injured, you need to do rehab and stuff. But a lot of coaches view concussions as not a legit injury. They're like, oh, shake it off, or oh, you got your bell rung. That's part of football. And so for a lot of players, they didn't understand. I'd say actually almost all players didn't understand until this stuff started coming out exactly what concussions could do to you over the long term.
Absolutely.
And the NFL, from everything I know about the NFL, knew about this and didn't tell anyone because they knew it wouldn't be a problem.
Exactly. And that's, we just got done talking about negligence. And with negligence, there's a duty of care, there's a breach of that duty of care, there's causation, and then there's that injury element. And the causation is the link between the breach of the duty of care to the actual resulting injury. And the students, we've had discussions in earnest, but we really haven't gotten to the heart of it, talking about, well, what really was the duty of care that the NFL owed to the players? And it seems reasonable to argue that the NFL owed a duty of care, still owes a duty of care to players, to put them on notice about the likely sort of dangers of playing football and the likely sort of consequences that concussions pose. And if they're actively, as the complaint, the class action complaint from the 2011 concussion complaint said, the NFL knew about this information, and not only did they try to suppress that information, but they engaged in a comprehensive campaign of misinformation to confuse people and to say, hey, concussion's not a big deal, it's just a simple bump on the head. We've got this scientific sort of body of academic knowledge that says that. So I'm curious for you, as someone who's played the game at a high level and has witnessed sort of the dangers of concussions and the impact of that, what is the duty of care that the NFL poses, not just to players, but to Pop Warner players, because the NFL sets that example in terms of the public trust.
Well, I think the duty of care for the NFL is to make everyone legitimately aware of the dangers that can happen with concussions, and not just the ones that kind of knock you out over the middle of the field, receiver going up, slamming his head down, but also the subconcussive forces that linemen face.
Absolutely.
So you see these Pop Warner kids lining up against each other and start smashing into each other, at 7, 8 years old. And yeah, it's not a real huge hit, but from everything I've seen from the research, those are just as dangerous, if not more so, than
Absolutely.
the big hits that everyone notices and goes, ooh, big concussive hit, because you're constantly traumatizing the brain. You're hitting it over and over and over and over again. And so the NFL needs to make parents aware that if your kids are starting hitting at this early age, well, then there's this % chance that they're going to develop, CTE or dementia or Alzheimer's or ALS later on in their life, because up until now, the NFL hasn't even been interested in doing those studies.
Absolutely.
And you would think that as a huge part of your game, your people are beating their heads against each other, you might have some obligation to maybe research that, see if it's safe or not, but up until now, not so much.
Well, I think that speaks to the notion that you're talking about interchangeable pieces. If you're not on the field, they're actively trying to replace you, and there's no repercussions. Mm-hmm. The thing that kind of boggles my mind from most professional sports perspective is that there's this aura, there's this notion that the real world does not apply to professional sports, whether it's issues within the locker room in terms of bullying or employment-related matters with sexual harassment, or whether it's duty of care that's owed to your players to prevent them from being subject to foreseeable risks of harm, like you're saying. Those concussive and subconcussive hits, those, every play they're getting off the ball and blocking each other, that, as you said, very well could be more dangerous than a normal concussion. So the thing that consistently boggles my mind and where we see liability is the NFL, or the NCAA for that matter, thinking that because sport is sport, that's going to somehow encapsulate or shield them from liability. And we're seeing that that's not really the case, whether it's the class action for concussions or the class actions for former athletes and current athletes in college athletics wanting a piece of their likeness for compensation for use of their likeness. And we're seeing that this sort of deference to sport as this amorphous sort of mythical creature is crumbling in the wake of the commercialism and the billions upon billions of dollars that are being generated. I think Roger Goodell had said, I want by 2020 the NFL to be making $20 billion a year. And that's just an audacious number to think that if you're a nonprofit or you're trying to get nonprofit status, that the gross amount of money can allow you to act in this way and not think there's repercussions. So it's...
Well, actually, and let me interject in there, is that I think a lot of that has to do with the origins of the game itself, in that sports initially arose kind of as, people getting together to do something that other people didn't like to watch, or, it was trying to keep your body in shape. Then all of a sudden other people were like, whoa, that's crazy what you can do, let's get in shape. And because of the almost idolatry of like the golden years, the origins of sport, you see, oh, these are the giants of the past, or, the golden, like, that kind of thing, where it really makes it so that you don't pay attention to the present, which is what sports have become, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has branches in the NFL all over the United States. It's starting to expand overseas to London, possibly to Mexico or Canada. And in the case of like soccer and baseball and basketball, has branches all over the world. This is a true multinational corporation. And so there is this idea from people who watch sports that it is still somehow this game, when it is very much not a game. It is a business, and it needs to be treated just like every other business.
Absolutely.
Because that's what it is. You don't get a free pass just because you're legitimizing some forms of violence out on the field. That doesn't mean that you get to ignore standard laws and practices, because all businesses have to abide by that if we want to keep our society stable.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. How is the NFL doing, or professional sport as a whole, in applying the rules of society, whether it's regarding discrimination, harassment, misogyny, sexism? Right now, in your experience, both as a player and now as someone who's outside looking in with everything that's raining down on professional sport, how are they doing with these types of things involving harassment or employment-related matters?
They're moving slowly. They're kind of getting there, but it's going to take a while, because one of the problems, especially with the NFL in particular, is that the people in power tend to be rich old white men. No offense to any rich old white men in the room. It's one of those things where this is, a lot of the issues that we face are clearly generational issues. They're societal issues where you see players coming in from college, because the average player age, is right around 22 or 23, I think, somewhere around there. And that means that you see almost in real time these societal shifts that are happening generationally. And the problem is that the members of the front office, the members of the coaching staffs, the members of the NFL itself, in terms of like the NFL front office, these are all people who have held their jobs probably for quite a few of them going on 30, 35, 40 years now. And they were raised in a very different era, and they have very different social views. And so just like any other social change, the real lasting change only happens when older generations die and younger generations replace them. And it's kind of a morbid way to look at things, but that is historically true for just about everything. Mm-hmm. Is until those older generations are out of the picture, then you don't really see any sort of replacement change happening, because the younger generations haven't had time to get into positions of power and make those changes.
So do you think that your personal experiences, whether it was dealing with supporting marriage equality or commenting about other sort of issues, whether it's the scandal down in Miami, that those arose because of the generational sort of gaps between people in the locker room and people in the front office, or is there more of a fundamental issue involving sport and how it sort of doesn't play by the same rules as normal society?
I think there's a two-part answer to that. The first part is some of it is definitely generational in that the issues being talked about, like my case, for example, that was definitely one where there were, not a lot of higher-ups that agreed with me. There were a lot of players who agreed with me, but, not a lot of executives. With Jonathan Martin, it was kind of the same thing, where it's this generational thing where you have these coaches who think it's being a drill sergeant, and Jonathan Martin's like, whoa, hold on a minute, I'm a human being. Like, you guys are really kind of screwing me over here. And so in that sense, yes, there are those generational issues, but in the other sense, there's always going to be this clash between athletes and sort of executives, in that because sports have become such a big business, they want to be like every other big corporate business, which is completely neutral, so they can appeal to as many customers as possible. That is the NFL's goal. The whole breast cancer awareness stuff for the NFL, that is to raise awareness among women viewers, so more women watch the NFL. Hopefully it goes to a great cause, although the numbers show that I think it's maybe 2.5% of the money raised actually goes to breast cancer research. But it's a marketing ploy. It is, here ladies, we care about you, come care about our game. Oh, and by the way, here's a jersey you can buy for $49.99, and here's some pom-poms you can buy for $29.99, and here's a halter top you can buy. And it really is, they're a business trying to grow their product. And whenever a player speaks out or makes themselves heard as something more than the product on the field, there is a dichotomy, a contradiction there, because the business does not like that. The business wants to control the entire message. But the players are people. to borrow the phrase, punters are people, players are people. They are individual people with their own tastes, with their own views. And with the rise of social media, you're going to start seeing more and more and more of this as fans get to see who players actually are. And players are actually able to engage with fans and show them who they actually are. I mean, when you think about how people relate to professional sports, over the last 30 years or so, it's primarily been watching it on television and maybe a chance encounter at training camp or at the bar. Whereas in the past 5-6 years, you have social media, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Imager, you have Tumblr, you have all these different mediums that athletes can show who they really are, and there is no control over it by the league. And that's really changing how things are going to play out going forward. And I've actually seen it from a couple teams where they try to ban all social media presence from the players on their team, because they don't want their guys out there saying anything at all, in the slight fear that someone might say something slightly controversial. And to me, that's a shame, because again, we're role models. We have an obligation to be good role models, not quiet corporate drones that tow the company on.
And that's incredibly interesting. I mean, above and beyond sort of the interplay between freedom of expression and keeping business as usual, sort of the rank and file under wraps. I know, that's a really interesting connection, that these scandals, quote unquote, or these major sort of events didn't get leaked out in the public consciousness as quickly or as frequently if social media had not been in the picture here. So the increased sort of volume of scandals coming out is directly linked. It seems like there's a direct correlation to the presence of social media and people actually accessing that medium. So that's really cool. That's a really cool sort of point that you raise, and it must be terrifying for either people who are afraid of its power or don't understand that power. But I guess if you were these students, most of them or a lot of them are interested in obtaining positions within the sport management field, and if they are going to be in a position, hopefully that they are not out of touch with society, like I think the connotation is with people who have been in a position for 30 years or so. But if they're going to be savvy sort of managers of professional athletes or college athletes, what can they do to prevent issues from getting out of hand to the point where you have a Jonathan Martin or a Jerry Sandusky, or the situation that you encountered with trying to support marriage equality. I mean, what can we do as future leaders in this area to make it so that message can still be heard, but it's not a way that damages a player or a brand or what have you, that all works out in harmony?
The biggest problem I see in what I saw in the locker room was the idea that winning trumps everything. The idea that making money for the corporation trumps everything. And you see that in the sliding scale of justice that the NFL has, and that pretty much every other sport has, is that stars get to get away, sometimes literally with murder, and scrubs get cut. And that's something that has to change if we want to change the behavior. And it doesn't just have to change in terms of the NFL, it has to change in college, it has to change in high school, and it has to be something where we say, look, it doesn't matter how good your athletic ability is, if you are not a fundamentally decent human being, if you do not possess the capacity for empathy and understand why your actions are harming others, then we're not going to let you play for our team. Because there is no justification for having someone who will, beat women or abuse children or, whatever the case happens to be. There is no justification for having that person on your team because of their sports ability or their coaching ability. In the grand scheme of things, this is a children's game. It doesn't matter. Like, there's absolutely no difference me kicking the ball 45 yards will have in the universe. However, me speaking for other people, me being a role model, me trying to be a decent human being, that will have an impact on other people. And so that's something that we need to highlight from a managerial level, is that the people you choose to represent your organization, if you don't choose people who understand what it means to be a role model, well, then these same instances are going to keep occurring because they've been told their entire lives, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you perform out on the field.
Do you think that's actually going to happen within? Well, do you think
that's that's a pretty
you've got a
societal shift right there. I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Absolutely.
Oh, my daughter's watching now. Just
who is adorable? Well, I could go on forever. I don't know how much time you have, but
I bet you didn't know this was going to turn into The Ring.
Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask? Yeah, go for it.
It's not like totally like sport law related. It's more just like getting into the mindset of like an athlete. Do you think like the outside like and internal like elements of what was going on during your like situation with like the special teams coordinator saying rude comments, Leslie Frazier talking to you, do you think that impacted like your play on the field? Like, was it mentally hard to kind of like get yourself together for the games because you're thinking about all these other things too?
Yeah, I will say that was something that I had to deal with during that last year with the Vikings, is that there was this sense of pressure in my mind that I had to be so good that they couldn't cut me, that there was no excuse whatsoever for them to cut me, and that affected me for a couple games. I mean, you hear about guys, they play better when they play loose, right? They're not worried about anything, they're relaxed, and there were definitely a couple games where I was like, okay, I have to be the best punter ever out here on the field, and then I miss hit balls because I was too tense. I wasn't focusing on what I was doing. I was more worried about the result than how to actually get to that result. And so that's something where I felt that early on in the year, I definitely felt that. But then later on, I was just kind of like, well, you know what, screw it, whatever. If they're going to cut me, they're going to cut me. I'm just going to go out and do what I know how to do. And I started punting much better.
Were you satisfied with I mean, do you think that they cut you under pretext? The reason they, in the report that came out was that, hey, based on these comparables, you were performing poorly or worse in comparison to XYZ. Do you think that that's a legitimate sort of reason, or do you think that it was completely pretextual and that they just cut you because you were becoming, quote unquote, a distraction?
To me, it would have been a legitimate reason had we had an actual competition and had they not drafted a punter in the 5th round when they still had positions of need elsewhere. Because that to me was kind of the defining moment, is that in the NFL, you don't draft a punter or a kicker unless it is your clear intention that that guy is your starter next year. I mean, that has always been the case. And so based on the year I had, when I saw them draft Jeff Locke, I was like, okay, the only reason they're doing this is to replace me because there was nothing in my numbers that warranted being replaced. Because the other thing is that I had a career year that year. Like, that was one of the best years I had for the Vikings, and I had been doing everything they asked me to do. And so it's like, well, hold on a minute. If I'm doing what you guys want me to do, if my numbers are the same as they've always been, then why do you feel the need to replace me? And so I think that's one of the issues with the NFL is that it's so easy to find pretexts to cut guys. I mean, like with Alex Smith, when he had his concussion with the 49ers, they got rid of him in a hurry. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. He was the starting quarterback. He was doing well. You know, he was the guy who had the job. And then Colin Kaepernick played well for a couple games. And they're like, all right, we'll give him the boot. It's about money now. Or it's about, you know, oh, we don't want a game manager. Or there's so many useful pretexts that you can use that people will believe because on some level they are believable. But if you dig a little deeper and you look at it, you're like, well, hold on a minute. This doesn't quite make sense. I mean, there's something missing here.
Right.
And in my case, I felt that was definitely the case. I mean, obviously, I'm a biased source here. This is something where I feel, yes, I was cut unfairly, but it was also something I tried to look at as impartially as possible and say, okay, was there something in my numbers that could justify this? Was there something in my production that could justify this? And I didn't see anything.
Did you ever entertain the notion of maybe filing I know you were threatening to file a lawsuit and then donate the funds to LGBT awareness charities, but did you ever entertain the notion to file a lawsuit for to compensate yourself for the loss of income based off of being cut prematurely as an NFL punter, which there's only so many jobs at such a high pay level?
My dad was really pushing for that, but
Yes.
I said no. If this is the case, if this is legitimately about me making a statement, then I want to be very clear that whatever money I get from this, I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing this to prove a point to the NFL that you can't do something like this. You can't cut someone because of their political statements of supporting a group that's being discriminated against. And to take, in my mind, to take money from that really kind of lessens the argument, because then again it's one of those useful pretexts. People can point to it and say, oh, you're just doing it for the money. And despite me not getting any money whatsoever, I still have tons of people on the Twitter like, oh, how about your shakedown of the Vikings? You took all that money from them. I'm like, God, you guys just fail at reading comprehension.
Yeah, that must be tough dealing with all the trolls. But
it can be entertaining at times. But yeah, the ones that bother me are the lazy trolls. It's like the information's right there. You have Google. You're on the internet.
So basically, there's a lesson there. If you do want to troll someone, if it's a creative troll, you'll probably score some points. If you want to.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I mute people who are lazy. I encourage people who are creative because I enjoy that. If you take the time and put the effort into trolling me creatively, I appreciate that because that shows you care. That shows you're trying to do something. You're invested
in that.
If you're just spouting off some random insult that doesn't even make sense, I'm just like, well, you're boring.
Well, that's as people are going to be entering the sport management field, some people also would be interested in marketing and branding and things like that. And as you mentioned, you're big in social media. You're big in terms of being a gamer. Where do you see social media going 10 years from now? Where is that going to be? What are people going to be doing with whether it's social media or new forms of communication or electronic or video games or things like that? Are we going to see sort of the next level for sport, or is there any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, I think you're going to see it developing more and more as players kind of developing their own individual brand. And one area I would say actually to really look into is how esports is dealing with this.
Yes.
Because esports is a very rapidly growing market. And I mean, we're talking about, Counter-Strike tournaments and stuff used to have maybe a $20,000 payday or a $50,000 payday. And now I think the latest League of Legends championship was for $6 million, I think was the total purse.
Was that the one in South Korea?
Esports is a legitimate sport that is growing because more and more you have kids growing up with a computer in the home.
Right.
The ease of access is there. You don't, that's one of the things that makes traditional sports, so many people are interested in them, is because all you need is a ball.
Right.
For soccer, all you need, just kick a ball around. For baseball, you need a bat and a ball. For football, if you're playing in the backyard, you're playing touch football, all you need is a football. So the ease of access is really there. And for esports, it's now there because everyone has a computer. Everyone knows about gaming. And so what you see with a lot of the e-gamers is that they have their own YouTube channels. They have their own streams. And yeah, they play as teams, but they're also very much their own individual brands, and they'll filter from team to team. I'd say it's very similar to having kind of like a marquee name player in European soccer, in like the Premier League, where you have these guys like Messi and Ronaldo and some of the other ones where it's name brand recognition as opposed to the team they play on. Right. And I think you're going to start seeing that more and more and more. Like, for instance, Richard Sherman in the NFL. There's a guy who all of a sudden people are looking at and following, not just because of his interview on, after the NFC playoff or championship game, but also because of his Twitter presence, because of his media presence, because of his social media presence.
Absolutely. It's interesting. You bring up esports, and I was trolling your Twitter feed last night, and I know you were.
Enjoy, by the way.
Yes. I know. You were making references to Gamergate, and it's interesting because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Gamergate, as I understand it, is sort of this movement or these issues about sexism and misogyny within esports, or something about a female developer who's getting treated unfairly because of her gender, and there's misogynistic sort of themes, and the sort of thing, the parallels I see is between traditional sport, the jock mentality where it's about being misogynistic and sexism at times, and now gamers like esport, like you're saying, are encountering similar sort of issues involving misogyny and sexual or sex-based stereotypes. Do you see? Well, first of all, am I getting this right, or because
it's a little more broad. Gamergate deals more with a broad collection of just kind of gamers who view themselves as core gamers, where they feel like they're being persecuted against because a couple articles came out saying that the idea of the gamer is dead because gaming is ubiquitous. It's no longer this trope of the pasty white nerd in his parents' basements, crouched away until the wee hours of the night. It's, everyone plays games now. And so the problem is you have a group of people who feel like their toys are being taken away from them, and they're like, well, no, this is our identity. This is how we've defined ourselves. You can't have it. This is ours. And it's leading to some pretty horrible stuff. But I'd say it's more human nature in general, in that our society has a problem with misogyny. It's not, it's not just sports. It's not just gaming, it's not just the internet, it's the fact that for essentially the entirety of human existence, we have been a patriarchal society, and that has expressed itself in a variety of different ways. And you see that in sports with the idea that male sports are somehow inherently better than female sports. Like, if someone talks about the NBA and then you ask them about the WNBA, odds are they'll be like, oh, that's just the girls. Who cares about them? What are they doing? And it's the same thing for women's soccer. Is that it's like, oh, women's soccer, who cares? And it's something we have to address because it shows that there is not true equality, and we're going to keep having these problems arise in football with stuff like Ray Rice, with domestic abuse, with domestic violence. We're going to keep having it arise in the tech world in terms of the technology sphere, like STEM courses and stuff. Girls aren't generally pushed towards STEM courses. They're pushed towards other courses. And so you have this dearth of female developers, and that's slowly being changed, but it's something that we need to look at and say, hold on a minute, why is it such a vast majority of men in the tech field? And is that the right thing to have going on? And until we examine that societally, you're going to keep seeing the instances happen in all these different fields because they're all subsects of a larger problem.
Absolutely. And STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, right? That's the acronym?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So, and that's really interesting, the broader points about society as well. Does anyone have any general questions that you wanted to ask? Chris? Yeah, go for it.
So I was wondering, within the past 10 years, do you see the NFL Network come into play, and ESPN talking about players 24/7? They're just analysis all the time. Does that affect the locker room at all, or do players not really pay attention to what the media has to say?
Players generally don't pay that much attention to what the media has to say. It's, if anything, it'll be kind of a joking, like, "Hey, did you see her on Pro Football Talk?" or something like that. It's because players are more concerned about keeping their jobs, which means that if you buy into everything that the media is saying about you, then you're not focusing on doing your job. And again, remember, the team's always trying to replace you. So every successful player I've seen doesn't worry about the media. They don't let the media affect them. It's something that you have to deal with the media, and if you know how to deal correctly with the media, it can make your job a lot easier. You don't put yourself in bad situations. But when push comes to shove, when you're out on the field, the only thing that's going to save you out there is your athletic ability. And so that's what you have to be focused on.
Great question. Yeah.
I just have a question. I don't know like the whole situation, your whole situation, so I'm not gonna like pretend that I do. But I'm just a little surprised. I guess since you weren't like directly affected by the equal rights movement, I guess looking back, like, do you wish that maybe you would have just waited a few more years until you?
My agent does.
I mean, I just was shocked.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. He actually did send me a text message after after Michael Sam came out saying, hey, looks like waiting a year probably would have turned out much better. But the thing is that even though I'm not personally affected by it, it is something that I felt was a worthy cause to fight for. And my reasoning has always been is that if I don't stand up for people who are being discriminated against, one day, if it's my turn, who is going to stand up for me? Because ultimately, when you get down to it, unless we all stand up for each other all the time, for equality all the time, well, then you're creating these examples of when people are allowed to be oppressed, and that shifts. Groups change. You're not always going to be the top dog, and if you don't work to make sure that everyone knows oppression is bad, well, then one day it's going to be your turn under the boot. And so that to me is something that hopefully more people start to understand, is that you're not just fighting for other groups' rights, you're fighting for your own rights in the future. I mean, and to me that's important, because I want my kids to grow up in a world where they can be who they want to be and not have to worry about oppression, no matter who they happen to be. And I would like to live in that same world too, because I mean, 30 years ago, if I was a gamer like I am, a nerd like I am, I probably wouldn't have been able to play sports. I would have been hazed mercilessly and probably beat up multiple times until eventually I wasn't able to play anymore. But now it's like, okay, yeah, you're a gamer, that's kind of strange, but whatever. I know other people who game, and things change.
Thanks.
Thank you. We've got one more. Yeah.
I don't know if you heard, but this morning it was confirmed that Roger Goodell is going to testify in the Ray Rice appeal. I was just wondering what you think will come of the commissioner by the end of this season.
Ooh, good question.
I think that this is a face-saving maneuver, wherein that since it's not in front of an actual judge on the bench, there is no legal obligation for Roger Goodell to answer every question. And so if he comes to a question that he doesn't want to answer, he doesn't have to. I hope that the judge compels him to answer using any means at her disposal, because, again, based on everything I know of how the NFL operates, Roger Goodell has been playing with the truth very loosely, and that if he didn't see those tapes, it was through willful negligence, because every team I've known has a security department that goes out and is aware of stuff like this. And the NFL security department is out there searching for stuff like this. And these are guys who, they're ex-FBI, they're ex-police force, they're ex-military guys, and they have friends who are still working in their respective fields who they contact when stuff like this happens. And so to have this idea that Roger Goodell somehow was not aware of what was on that tape really just goes against everything the NFL has been about for 15 years or so. And so I don't think a lot is going to come of this testimony, simply because there are no legal consequences if Goodell doesn't decides not to talk. But who knows? Maybe I'll be proven wrong.
There might not be consequences right now, but if this sort of appeal is ineffectual or it's arbitrary, then his next step is, Ray Rice's next step is challenging in the courts, and that would have some meaningful impact where the players at hand must testify, And also, the other thing here is some unintended consequences of the NFL throwing the book at Ray Rice is this sets a precedent. And you see that precedent now, not just in the National Football League, but the National Hockey League. You see Slava Voinov, defenseman for the Kings, he's now suspended indefinitely with pay while it's investigated, a criminal investigation about him committing domestic violence against his significant other. Whereas last year, the NHL had a very similar event involving a star goaltender for the Avalanche. Nothing happened whatsoever. So now we do see a precedent being set. And if they don't honor that precedent, then there's legal liabilities. So this could be the beginning, because of that image of the awareness. I mean, for better or for not, that people seem to not really care. I mean, the memory of the public was very short up until this sort of thing happened. Maybe this is the tipping point to borrow from Malcolm Gladwell.
The fact that we're visual creatures, and
Yes.
that in your mind you can kind of conceptualize the idea of Ray Rice beating up his fiance, but when you actually see it happening, that is physical evidence that your brain then processes and has a concrete foundation to say, this is what domestic violence looks like. And I think for a lot of people, until they saw that visual image, the image in their mind didn't match up to that actual concrete evidence. And once they were able to see it, they're like, okay, I need to reassess my priorities because this is unacceptable.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other questions from students? Yes.
Do you try to encourage some of your former teammates or just any NFL players in general to both promote and engage in activism, such as what you do?
I try not to tell other people to do what I do. I've always felt that the best way to lead is through example. And so I'm never going to ask anyone to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And I figured that if I go out and do it myself, then I can basically say, look, here's what I'm doing. If you guys want to come along, that'd be great because I'm out there doing it. But I'm never going to force you to do it because everyone has to make their own choices. And I know there's something to be said for encouraging people. I mean, like, hey, you want to join up? Do you want to help me with this? But at the same time, especially in professional sports the way they are now, it's really asking guys to risk a lot. I mean, my case in point, like I'm not playing in the NFL anymore. And so I think a lot of guys are still at that point where this is a job that you can't find anywhere else. It's not like you can find another NFL somewhere on the continent. And it's tough to jeopardize that.
Yep.
So I like to be the example, and hopefully more will follow. But I'm not going to try and push anyone simply because I feel you have to make your own choices.
Absolutely, absolutely. Any other students? Dr. Holmes, did you have a question?
I did, yes. Good morning, Chris, and thanks for joining our class. I'm Dr.
Of course.
Holmes, one of the other faculty members. So we really appreciate you being with us today. One thing I want to say, I guess a comment first, is when you advocate for one, you advocate for all. So that your advocacy is greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you the last student sort of addressed the question that I wondered is what advice, I guess, or strategies would you have for athletes who want to become more socially involved, more socially active? You're a role model, a great example for people to look at. But how many of you in here are athletes at U of L? We got anybody? We got a few. Okay, your job's to do what? Play, right? Okay, their job's to play. Professional athletes, Olympic athletes. So that's their main focus. So what strategies would you give high-level athletes who really want to take a stand and yet know that they have to concentrate on their job on the field?
The key things I would say is that do your research. Make sure the people you're getting involved with are legitimate groups. It's not just some random person that's asking you on Twitter or some random cause that you happen to see. Make sure that they are a legitimate cause, because that's one of the quickest ways to have a downfall is to get involved with a group where you don't understand everything they stand for. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're speaking for something you really kind of wish you weren't speaking for. So research is good. Be aware that there are most likely going to be consequences for your actions, and ask yourself before you do it, are you okay with the worst case scenario? Are you okay with the fact that if you do this, there is a chance that you might not get to do what you love doing anymore? And if it's worth enough to you, then you'll be able to go through it without worrying about, okay, am I splitting my time between my sport and what I'm standing up for? It can be when I'm at the facility, I'm focusing purely on my sport because that's what I'm there to do. And when I'm at home, when I'm a private citizen on my own free time, then I get to do what I want to do. And knowing that there may be consequences for that, knowing that there probably will be consequences for that, but willing to accept those consequences anyways because it's the right thing to do. And that's something that everyone has to make their choice on their own. I can't tell you this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, this is a worthy cause, this is not a worthy cause. It's something that you have to look at your own circumstances. You have to look at the circumstances surrounding you. You have to look at who's reliant on you. Where are you at in your athletic career? It's something where a first-year player who's maybe a 7th round draft pick, if he or she speaks out on something, well, odds are pretty good they're probably going to be cut simply because they haven't established themselves. Whereas, I was slightly safer in that I had been established in the NFL, so basically that bought me the rest of the year before they cut me. But say if it was someone like a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers, they could speak out and really not face any consequences at all, again, coming back to that sliding scale of justice, because they're a superstar. And so, unfortunately, that's the world we live in that what your position is in terms of, the value you provide to the team is very much going to be taken into account if the team decides to keep you or not. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself what's more important. Is it the team or is it my fundamental values as a human being? And again, that's a choice only you can make.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, one more. Last one.
While you're in the locker room, do you have these conversations with your teammates, or you kind of keep your mouth shut and just focus on the game? And the second question is who, another athlete that inspired you to be such a social activist?
For the first one, we actually had a lot of conversations. It's the guys have quite a bit of free time to fill in the locker room, and we talk about a wide variety of topics. Because the thing is, it's like any other workplace. You have the water cooler. People gather around, they chat about stuff, they talk about things that are interesting or the current news of the day. And football players are no different. I mean, we live in the world just like everyone else, and so when things happen, we talk about them. Now, I will say, in terms of social activism, of same-sex marriage rights and stuff like that, I was very careful never to push that on anyone. And it was always, if someone came up to me and wanted to talk about it, I was more than happy to talk about it. But I wasn't going to hold court in the center of the locker room and be like, gather around, we're talking about same-sex marriage today. That's a douche move. There might be people in there who maybe they don't want to have that conversation. They just want to focus on playing the game. And we're there to play the game. So that's, that would be wrong on my part to try to distract them from what they're trying to do for something that is, what I want to talk about. Now, hand in hand, that goes with when I'm away from the field, I get to talk about whatever I want. and you don't get to stop me because I'm not on the football field anymore. But, that to me was something that I always made sure I was careful about is that, I wasn't trying to force guys to have a conversation that they absolutely didn't want to have, but to those who wanted to have it, I was more than willing to have that conversation. And I talked with a lot of guys, some who agreed with me, some who didn't. And they're always good conversations because we were respectful to each other. As far as the second point, what was it? I lost my train of thought.
Any former athletes that inspired you, right?
Oh, any former athletes? Not really. I mean, I have to admit this. I'm not really a watcher of sports. I like playing them. I don't really watch them. I've picked up a lot over the years, kind of through osmosis, just being around sports and playing them so much. But if it's up to me during my free time, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to play a video game. I'm going to do something else. I generally don't watch sports. So I mean, I guess kind of the figures you hear about historically, like Muhammad Ali. That he's a good one. It was Kenny Washington played for the Bruins. He was a good one. But yeah, no one that I could really point to and say this was my role model. I want to be like this person. It was more just, I want to be the role model, which I guess is kind of selfish, but I mean, I want to be the best. So.
We've got one more question. Is there any, since you're a heavy reader, is there any one book that you could suggest to us that we read that would be beneficial?
Ooh, so I'm a big sci-fi fantasy reader. The one book I always suggest to people, and I offer it with a caveat, is read Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, but do so in a way that doesn't give Orson Scott Card any money, because he's a raging bigot. And check it out from the library, borrow it from a friend, read it in a way that he doesn't profit from, because he wrote this amazing book on empathy and seeing things from another person's point of view, and then completely missed the point in his own life. I still don't understand how that happens, but that was one of the books that I read as a kid, and I was just like, wow, this is an amazing book. I like this book. And the movie, I haven't seen the movie, but from everything I've heard, it doesn't really do the book justice. But yeah, that's a good book. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend paying for it.
Excellent. Well, at the risk of keeping you here for hours and hours, because I think this could go on, thank you so much again for joining us and giving such a profound and outstanding guest back and forth about everything involving the law, society, and everything in between. So thank you very much.
All right, now I gotta take my daughter to school.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
All right, later, guys.
See ya.
So, thoughts, comments, anything? Good. Good use of your time.
That was great. That was very good.
Very good. Yeah, that was very profound. Very excellent. So, for me, that was very interesting because of the glimpse not only he gave about the locker room, but how, in a sense, that's just a microcosm of society, and these issues are not just confined to sport, but they're confined to virtually everything that we come in contact with as a society. That's one of the main themes that I came across, but also the thing that really kind of, I didn't, maybe I thought I knew, but I didn't really connect it, was that all these sort of scandals and all these activism things, everything where you have the real life connecting to sport, it's facilitated through social media. So, Dr. Amber, you're an expert in communications, and it's very interesting that all of these sort of issues are being crystallized in rapid fire real time, and it would not happen but for social media. So I think that's a very amazing thing that accelerates the issues that we are seeing apply in terms of the real world, in terms of the legal issues, directly to sport. So, I mean, that's really all I got. I didn't want to, because another section took the time out of their busy schedule to come when they didn't need to come, and for you folks to thank you very much for coming. I'll just leave you guys with some sort of administrative stuff. Your quiz is online. It just covers solely sexual harassment, only the sexual harassment aspect. So you've got the questions involving quid pro quo and hostile work environment harassment. Nothing involving Chris Kluwe, obviously, or the articles that we assigned. That's more for our own background. For next class, I will be putting up the reading assignment. It will be either premise liability or more employment law issues, probably be premise liability. Everyone will have until 11:59 p.m. on Sunday night to take the quiz, so you guys don't need to rush home and take it right now. If anyone doesn't have any other questions, you guys are good.